Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Cerruti. I'm the Executive Director of the Walker Art Center, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all here tonight for the second of three of these conversations, this series called Abundant Cities. We created this series in partnership with the Minneapolis Foundation, and we're especially honored that so many of you have chosen to be indoors with us tonight on this beautiful summer evening. Because we're about to have a conversation about investing in this place and making it more vital and working for more people. I really want to ground us in acknowledging that the Walker Art Center and the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden are on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary homelands of the Dakota people. This site at one time was an expanse of marshland and meadow, and it holds meaning for Dakota, Ojibwe, and people of other Native nations, many of whom live in community with us today. So in addition to this acknowledgement, I also want to recognize and thank Amanda Hunt and Megan Leafblad of the Walker staff, whose energies went into tonight's program, as did many, many other parts of the Walker. So thank you all. I want to thank Adair Mosley, CEO of the African American Leadership Forum, for moderating tonight's panel as well as the other two conversations in this series with quite skill and aplomb and insight, I would say. And of course, a special thanks to R.T. Ryback, President and CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation, who's been just an amazing partner in thinking about this project and developing it and supporting it. But also as like one of Minneapolis's foremost champions. So we appreciate that about you, RT. We're thrilled to be hosting all three of these Abundant Cities conversations with a really incredible lineup of individuals that work across different sectors, but who are each invested in cities and civic life in really important ways. This evening, we're focusing on inclusive cities, on the idea of Minneapolis as a place that's where everyone is valued and seen as essential to the city's culture, to its economy, and ultimately to its future. Because that's a lot what we're talking about is the future of this place. I'm looking forward to learning alongside all of you as tonight's amazing panel of community leaders share their ambitions and their experience with creative placemaking and design in public spaces and innovative approaches to building urban realms that are accessible and welcoming. Now, I'm going to introduce R.T. Ryback, former mayor of Minneapolis and president of the Minneapolis Foundation, to share a few words as well.
Thank you so much, Mary, and it's wonderful to be here. I also want to thank our team who's been involved. Sarah Gillen there is the art director on our side who did a tremendous amount of the work. I also want to introduce the team of David Frank, Beth Shilgren, and Sarah Harris, who we have on board to not only help the foundation become involved with this project, but also to produce a report at the end about the best ideas that emerge from this series and what it will take to actually make them happen. And so that report is going to be one of the things that is produced by this, but also you'll see a QR code on our materials and on the screen. Go to that, give us your ideas too, and we'll put those into that report. So we're awfully excited about that. I also want to introduce Steve Kramer, President and CEO of the Downtown Council. Steve, thank you so much for being here and for your support on this work. For 1 minute, I want you to not think about cities, and I want you to think about yourself. I want you to think about a moment when something happened that made your life better. Maybe you dumped them, maybe they dumped you. Maybe you got a job, maybe you didn't get a job. Maybe you chose to move to another city, or maybe you were smart enough to move to Minneapolis, okay? Any of those things. I want you to think about that moment and think about the fact that at that moment, something wonderful you imagine could happen and something didn't. What often happens in those cases is that you're not often the one who is in charge. You, more often than not, were the one dumped or didn't get the job or whatever. I mention all of this, and my wife Megan back there is wondering, where are you going with this, RT? Where I'm going with it is that in our lives there are moments when change happens and big things can happen. Cities are no different. This is one of those moments. It's a moment when we can choose to say, how do we put it all back together again? Or we believe, as part of this series, how do we bring in the very best ideas, people with a wide range of experiences to begin to pique our interest? No one on this panel or anyone else is going to come in with the one thing we should do, because there's not one ingredient to bake a cake. The recipe for our future really has to come from a collection of ideas and issues. And most important, now let's go back to thinking about you, is the fact that we wanted you here because we need a posse for innovation and change, an ongoing group of people in this community who've done what we've done before, but really need right now, which is to not settle for the status quo, to not settle for mediocre, to bring the best ideas from elsewhere, and much more important, create things that are of Minneapolis itself. So thank you for being here enough to care about our city. Thank you for engaging in this work, and thank you for not just walking out of here and saying your work is done. Our work, and it's an exciting body of work, is just beginning. So to kick off our panel, we're awfully pleased to have Adair Mosley as our moderator. Is the CEO of the African American Leadership Forum. He previously was CEO of Pillsbury United Communities. He's created incredible different bodies of work in the city, from the North Market grocery store to the wonderful program that helped create college access for every student in North Minneapolis. But he's also a person who loves cities and where they're going and understands the people in them uniquely. So we're blessed to have Adair as our moderator. Adair, please welcome, and we're just awfully happy to have you doing this work for us.
Thank you. Yes, this is on. Good evening, everyone. I echo that everyone is inside on such a beautiful day. But we are going to have a wonderful conversation. And as we get started this evening, I've gotten to know, of course, I've known one of the panelists really well, but I've gotten to know the other two, and you all are in for a treat with the wealth of knowledge that they will share and impart on this city. Starting right here, I guess I will start with Kate Downing-Khalid is the founder and CEO of Imagine Deliver, a nationally award-winning strategy and insights firm using community-centered and equitable design methods. We have all the way from Detroit, Rochelle Riley guides Detroit's investment and innovation in the creative economy as the city's director of arts and culture, and no stranger to the city and back, and have spent the last 3 days touring the city. But we have Stephen Bozacker, is the Senior Vice President of Innovation at the German Marshall Fund, and directs their city's program with supporting local level policymakers and practitioners to build inclusive, sustainable, and globally engaged cities. So a wonderful panel this evening. A lot of this work all of this is about how do we fully embody the spirit of inclusion. And tonight is a call to action to reclaim the city as a co-created space. And who are those individuals that need to be a part of that narrative and the storytelling as we think about the future of this city? And then when we think about social inclusion, that offers up the counter, though, that we've had social exclusion. And so I would love for you all to start this evening, and this is any one of you can open this conversation. But as we think about, and we'll talk about downtown for a little bit because that was the genesis of this conversation, is really thinking about our downtown core. As we think about the future of downtown, how can it be the collision of culture, identities, foster the kind of socioeconomic mixing that needs to create an environment for everyone to live, work, and play in? Big question, but someone open us up. Kate, please.
I can get us started. Adair mentioned that I run an insights and equity-focused design firm, and what that means for me is that when I come onto a stage like this, I bring a lot of people with me. So I have a lot of notes from residents of Minneapolis around their dreams for what Minneapolis looks like in the future. It would behoove us, I think, to start at the beginning. Our downtown is in need of all the things that you said earlier, Adair. But we think about sort of the changes that downtown has gone through in the recent past with the pandemic. And I would actually press us to start at the very beginning. And my team provided a little bit of background for me. But let's start with the land acknowledgement that we heard earlier. The downtown Minneapolis was built on the genocide of Dakota people, and in the early 1900s was built to be a hub of capitalism that was racialized capitalism, to build specific spaces for some people and not others, to your point about social exclusion. And even as recently as the early 2000s, gentrification in the Elliott Park neighborhood made housing and living downtown very unaffordable. And so now we have this moment of a pandemic that makes our chronic issues laid bare and acute. And we have the opportunity to rebuild and redesign together, but rebuild for everyone anew. And I'm really excited to do that together. And I think the way that we do that is by listening first, bringing different folks to the table, ensuring that we have the right decision makers in the right seats, and that we're sharing power along the way.
You said something so important, and I want to make sure that I focus on that. You said our downtown. And when you get to a point where anybody in your whole city can say our downtown, then you know you have made progress. But first, I also want to, and I'm reading it because I don't want to get it wrong, but I want to bring you greetings from the ancestral homeland of the Anishinaabe nations of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi Indians. Now, let me go back to the listening. Every time we have a conversation about what do we do, how do we fix, we are the ones having the conversation instead of having the conversations with the people that we want to help fix it for. So it has to start with, it is listening, but it's literally not making room at a table for people, but going to a table they're already sitting at saying, okay, what do you need? What do you want? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? And when you start to do that, then you start to get a sense of connection. One of my least favorite words in the English language, except the word booger, is inclusion.
Yes.
Everybody's doing DEI, committees, and people are making millions of dollars trying to explain diversity and inclusion. The problem with inclusion is you are always dealing with the fact that you're there already, and you're trying to bring people. And I always hate to be one of those folks who somebody wants to include because it's just a reminder that I am outside.
That's right.
So I think if we start to look for connections so that people feel equal instead of including, then that's a big first step. So I'm glad you said our downtown, because that's what we're trying to get to.
100%.
Go ahead.
I'll add quickly. First of all, thanks for the invitation. It's a delight to be back in my home, Minneapolis. I love the framing of this discussion, abundant cities. And, Minneapolis, in wanting to re-energize and revitalize after the tragedy of a global pandemic, and what it's done is certainly not alone. But as I've thought about this and kind of how we build something bigger that is for everyone, I'm acutely aware that vibrancy and energy won't ultimately come from the place or the spaces. It will come from abundant people. And I really think that it is people who are ultimately going to animate and bring that energy and vibrancy. And the soul of any city is its people. And the best cities have souls that are authentic, and they come from the mix and the intersection. And so to your point about who owns downtown, I think this city needs to think about the breadth of the city. There's a great quote that I'm going to use. There was a panel at the end of October in 2021. The city planner for LA said, we need to think less about restoring our downtowns than transforming our communities. And I think that that's really good advice for what Minneapolis needs to be about going forward here.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you're absolutely correct in the ways in which, right, yes, we see this, that downtown is the visible kind of manifestation, but I think it tells us, it gives a signal to other parts of the city, and we won't have a thriving city until all parts of it is thriving. So I think that's an excellent point. I want to back up here a little bit because we are still somewhat under the cloud. We are, not still, we are under the clouds of the things that happened in 2020, and this being ground zero for a lot of both civil and civil unrest and the racial reckoning that we saw. But thriving communities are built on a foundation of optimism and hope. And I think that that's something we have to tap into in this moment of both optimism and hope. What's on the horizon? So I would love, what are the ways that a city can restore that before we start talking about buildings and other things?
Let me just say, you have to have three things. So I'm not opposed to optimism and hope.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But I'm from Detroit.
Okay.
It has to be optimism and hope and opportunity.
Yeah.
Either an opportunity, you
And
with
hard
me,
work.
and hard work. If you don't give people the opportunity to be a part, to do the hard work, to do something with their optimism, then you wind up having people watching other people succeed. So, three things.
You added a third, opportunity. Great. Come in. Yeah.
I'll say, oftentimes that I hear in our spaces, we do, a lot of community insights and engagement work, especially in applying a targeted universalism approach. That means we go to those tables and go to the places where folks aren't typically asked aspirational questions. And then we go back to our systems and share solutions. And what our systems tend to say is we move at the speed of community trust. And I want to just posit that that is a lie. Our community is out in front of us. They have the optimism and readiness for hard work. Our systems need to catch up. And we have work to do that here in Minneapolis in really fostering the dreams of all of Minneapolis. And before I, thank you. Thank you. So our community has actually written quite a blueprint for us, or a scaffolding, or created an aspirational North Star for us to follow in really tangible ways that talk about what it means to build a new heartbeat from the center in a way that actually centers the margins and makes them central. So I'd be happy to share some of those if it's time now, Adair, or we can keep moving.
No, keep going.
Okay, so over the last year and a half, I had the opportunity to work with a local healthcare center here in Minneapolis. And they are responsible for a 10-block radius that happens to be downtown. And on that 10-block radius, there's a lot of opportunity for what it looks and feels like. So we asked some really aspirational questions of Minneapolis residents. And what they told us and what they painted for us was a beautiful picture of a pedestrian-centric 15-minute city promoting sustainability and healthy living, a city that models integration of urban design with food security to create resilience, nutrition, abundance, and a little whimsy. Imagine edible foods, apple trees, downtown. That would also help us with the heat effects that we experience downtown and the really severe environmental challenges that we're experiencing in downtown spaces. Using light, activation, art, human density to promote public safety without relying on traditional policing methods. Encouraging local BIPOC entrepreneurship at the street level, and Steve will probably talk a little bit about that later too, in a way that fosters commerce and vibrancy. Addressing the heat island effect with the role of green spaces, green buildings, tree canopy coverage to build a restful, resilient, and just landscape. Examining and rectifying the racist nature of private skyways and policies that limit access to some but not others, contributing to the racial and economic segregation of our city. featuring free parking and abundant public transportation, needing to recognize that if people don't come to our spaces because we don't make them accessible, we won't get that density we're looking for. Reopening third spaces for recreation, like our beloved Dayton's and Block E, to provide more opportunities for engagement and well-being. And finally, flooding our ecosystem with durable, low or no-cost capital to support and nurture BIPOC women and gender-expansive entrepreneurs and commercial developers.
So who are these people?
Minneapolis residents are telling us this.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the people of Minneapolis have painted this picture for us. We have a scaffolding in place. We can follow it.
Well, you've written the report. And in many ways, it's done.
The people of Minneapolis wrote the report.
Of course, yeah. And what wonderful insights when we go to community and we ask them what they need, right? And what do they want to see? Stephen, please.
Yeah, I just want to add that, I think maybe we did a prep call a week ago and had a nice conversation. And I think maybe Adair at some point said, oh, dear, we have to provide some hope, because we were doing a lot of diagnosing of kind of the mood and how it could pull you down. And I think in a moment like this, and I contributed to that. I've been to Minneapolis 3 times since George Floyd's murder, and I had shared that when I went away, each time I could only think of a single kind of sentiment and word, and it was sad. And for a city that had always given me such joy and energy and excitement to kind of be part of its building, I was disturbed by this and that heaviness, and it spoke, I think, to the mourning that was natural. It spoke to the heaviness of the moment, and it certainly spoke to a deep concern about whether the city can pull through. And this is where I'll make the turn. And the turn is, this is no time to not recognize what abundance and Minneapolis has, and things that it has done so extremely well, including neighborhood development. I work with 150 cities throughout Europe and North America on a regular basis. And, I can honestly say there's no city that has invested in its neighborhoods in the same way that Minneapolis has. It's built muscle. It invested money like no city ever has. I think $278 million over a 20-year period. Program that was controversial, wasn't loved by everyone. But on the other hand, I ride around Minneapolis the last 3 days, and I see the results of what that investment meant. You have nodes throughout the city that are strong, that are doing very well, and restaurants popping up in places we never imagined them to be. I think we can also look back to the kind of the post-industrial kind of problems in the 80s and 90s, and we can apply that to today. We have manufacturing buildings and warehouses we never imagined were going to be art and culture spaces, and breweries and distilleries, and that shows, and that strength and that ability, as well as kind of the robust sectors of nonprofits and philanthropy that are the envy of cities throughout the country. Private business that has never had to be asked to step up. That may be changing, and I hope that it's time that they do again. But there's a deep history from the 50s and the 60s where businesses gave pre-tax profits to build a community and art institutions, et cetera, and a civic spirit, a civicness about a city that is really like none other than I've seen. So, and that's just in activism, and so there's so much to build on here.
Thank you. And Rochelle, I want you to come in. Stephen, I'm going to ask you a question first to pick up on that, because a lot of our narrative right now, especially in the core, has been described as the kind of central business district. Yeah. And we talk a lot about the return of the worker. And in many ways, there's even this narrative to, we talked about this on our call, that our downtown feels really sanitized. We need some messiness. We need the thing of vibrancy and activity. But we know that work is not ever going to come back in the ways in which it should. And so we've centered a lot of our solutions certainly on the worker or them and the dependency of them coming back into our central business. So can you talk a little bit about the reframing of that. Yes, they are an important part of the narrative, but not the only part of that narrative and who we build a downtown for.
Right. Yeah, I do think that the reason I wanted to get to the strength of neighborhood building is I do think that this next period, 15, 20 years, really needs to be about potentially thinking of downtown as a different kind of neighborhood. And it's a more vertical neighborhood. But in any way you slice it, buildings that are not going to fill up in the same way they did in the past need people. And so, yes, you should be focusing on the office to housing conversions and fixing an affordable housing problem at the same time, if possible, overlaying things on sustainability and green while you're doing these things. But you're going to have to take steps, and I guess my point is that the strengths that Minneapolis has exhibited can be applied downtown, but it's going to take quite a mentality shift. That we're not building what it was before, a core center that is big business, corporate. You're going to need pieces of that, but it needs to be mixed in with what Minneapolis has done so well, so many other places.
Rochelle, I would love for you to come in because your work is centered on the creative economy, the artist, and we don't oftentimes include them in this, especially when we're talking about our downtown. And so can you talk about the role of the artist and the activists can play in the engagement in the co-design process and that kind of creative economy that we can also tap in?
Absolutely, but before I do that,
Yes.
I want to talk about this idea that people are not going to come back downtown. The same people are not going to come back downtown, and this was the point that Stephen was making in our pre-call that I just want to make sure that we hear. We have to stop looking at the past to find our future. So if we still think that we're waiting for the big company and the office buildings and thousands of people to come and fill those buildings, that's not going to happen again. But those buildings need, did somebody say preach? Thank you. Woo! But
We
really,
love call and response, so this is great.
But I was hoping that Stephen would mention it. I don't know where you said it was, where people, remind me as I get to it. Imagine a downtown where all of a sudden all of the first floors of all of those big buildings became mom and pop stores or neighborhood stores, or all of those businesses who are outside of the core, wishing they had more business and wishing people paid attention to them. Well, come and do your business here. I shouldn't have said do your business. Come and move your entity to this space so that you feel like you're a part of that people know you, and then all of a sudden you can say, well, you can come back to the mothership, that's out in this neighborhood if you like what we did there. But this idea that we're giving up on downtowns is very frightening to me, because if we decide that they're dead and we've got these dead cores and we're not really dealing with that, that's going to be a real problem. Now let me talk about where artists come in. Because, so you can see my T-shirt, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing is to remember that everybody who is a business, and you do not discount artists because you think it's a hobby or it's something that's cute or it's something that's extracurricular. Artists are small businesses. Artists work for a living. And when I talk about artists, I don't mean just fine artists and painters, but I mean every artist. And no matter who it is, no matter what they do, my goal is to make sure, whether it's in Detroit or if I'm talking to other people around the country, that they are able to achieve and make a living doing what it is that they're passionate about. You can't have that conversation about somebody who opens a restaurant and not have that conversation about somebody who opens a gallery. You can't have that conversation about somebody who decides to have a small tech company, but not have that conversation about a musician who decides that he's going to literally create a closet studio and put out records. That's great. Do you know how many people started that way? Prince. So just, I so want us to stop talking about artists as artists. And one of the greatest achievements, and my friend Wendy Holmes will know about this, it took me, I've been in this job for 4 years as Director of Arts and Culture for the city. There had not been one in the city of Detroit, the birthplace of Motown, of techno, of, amazing artists. There had not been a Director of Arts and Culture in 20 years when the mayor appointed me to this position in 2019. First of all, that was heinous, and I told him so. But then I was mad at myself because before I had that job, I was a newspaper columnist who never ragged on any of the previous mayors for that absence. I'm like, how did I not know that or not pay attention to that? But I think that if we literally pay attention to the creative economy, as I said, the greatest victory I had was to get people in the administration and people at the cabinet table to stop talking about artists, like they're over there. They are now the creative workforce. It's in the documents. That's how they, talk about things like that. So I'm like, yes, finally.
Yes, absolutely.
Can I
Please,
add one
come
thing
in.
to build off of what both Stephen and Rochelle shared? A colleague of mine reminded me this morning of a quote by Jane Jacobs. New ideas need old buildings. And there are so many new ideas in Minneapolis. I think that Minneapolis can be the model for what a Midwestern U.S. city's core looks and feels like, and Detroit too. Thank you. Yes, of course, Detroit too. We can share. But I think that we can look at our cityscape and think about the old buildings that we have just like it's people. They're assets. We need to put them together, breed new ideas there. It's an old concept from 1964 that still applies. We just need to make those spaces affordable.
So I'm putting that on a T-shirt too, because we got buildings in Detroit. Everybody left. There's all these buildings. You can buy a building for $10,000. That is so amazing to do that, to feel that, to pay attention to that. So I'm so
Yes.
glad you said that.
Thank you.
I just want to add really quick,
Please.
Adair, if I could. This is where space and place collide with this vision of a multicultural, fully involved group of people. And so this is an idea I want to put on the table. I had gone around the world after I was city coordinator for a year, and I walked about 37 cities and just talked to people about why they connect to their city, what's important, their government, etc. And I came back with one or two big impressions about Minneapolis. And all I could think about was the most vibrant places I went where the streets were full of small shops that were affordable to rent and usable by a wide variety of artisans and artists and bakers and makers. And I thought, what Minneapolis needs to do, certainly down Nicollet Mall, but hopefully in the arteries around it, is to get a group of willing business owners and tenants to say it's time to blast out the first floors and rebuild 7 doors or 10 doors on a block that now has one or none, and let artists who need a smaller space, something affordable, something that's temporary, maybe 6 months or a year, and come down and show off kind of what they're doing and what they're producing with a new audience. This is where the rest of the city and the vibrancy in this regard all over the city has the opportunity to bring that to downtown and give people a new market, a new audience, and push them back to their main stores. I mean, half of Northrop King artists could have a little 10 by 10 store downtown for a period of time. This is where I think that the future is going to require some really blast out ideas, and this is one of them that you should, I think, really think about.
And I do hope, before Dare you said, I
Please.
do hope that people are listening to you, because any building owner, any magnate, any CEO who is sitting on some big building downtown waiting to try and figure out how to bring those people back, let me just say the 1990s called and they want your attitude back. Yeah. It is not happening. So these things that Stephen is talking about, that can happen. Yeah. That can why would you let something sit empty when there's a possibility for something transformational that could happen? Yeah. So
I believe, not all, but I believe there's a couple of private sector leaders who own these buildings. That we can push. It'll take some work, but we can push. And I love that you all are bringing in, and we've had this as part of the last conversation. Jane Jacobs, I believe she was ahead of her time in terms of what she believed the possibility of cities, and saying make the block shorter, right? And really activate that streetscape, and around every corner should be vitality in life.
You bet. Well, what better than a city that has below zero temperatures for people to need to pop in the next store in 10 feet instead of hundreds of feet. It's the in and out, and in the end, it is all about street life. The city made big mistakes in the 80s and 90s to allow happen what happened. And that has to be undone. We've made a lot of mistakes in our history, and so much of what we need to be about in the next decades is undoing those things.
So one of the things I want to bring as we talk about, we'll continue to use the term inclusive here for this, but ultimately we do want to move to this place of belonging and ownership as part of this, right? But one of the voices that are missing a part of this, amongst others, is youth. And we oftentimes see our youth as nuisance, and we want to keep them out of downtown. And so I'd love you all to talk about the critical and vital role that they play, and is a, if you will, a signpost for vitality.
You used the word play. And I actually think that that's really important for all generations. And it's something we haven't talked about a lot. In Minneapolis, if we see groups of youth downtown, especially Black youth, people feel unsafe, right? For lots of racist reasons. But we also police young people downtown who don't have a place to be or a destination in mind for standing somewhere for too long. And that is, we have to change our mindset around play and creating spaces of community where we're watching out for each other, where people can be on a skateboard in a skate park or on a climbing wall or in a park and not be expected that they are up to no good. At the same time, we need spaces for our elders. And we need to, create really abundant spaces for multi-generational families. I was walking through San Francisco a couple of years ago with my husband, and he turned to me and he said, "Have you seen a kid, like, in the last day or two?" And I said, "No, we hadn't seen families." That's a symptom of a very wealthy space and a very unhealthy space.
I can tell you when we're sitting around having these conversations about youth and about kids and what to do about them, like they're a problem or like they're, instead of asking ourselves, who's going to be mayor in 2035?
That's right.
What are we doing to nurture whatever it is that they have as talent so that they feel like this city is theirs? Our big thing in Detroit is making sure that people don't leave. I had this wonderful young artist who called me up and said, "Will you write a reference for me for this job in New York?" And I said, "No." But I'll find you a job so you can continue to, do your art here. So I hired him as a graphic artist, and I don't make him do any work. He just, I shouldn't have said that because this is good tape. He does lots of work, but in addition to that, he's able to continue his art, and he's still in Detroit. Yeah. Everybody needs to do one. Each one grab one and just figure out how you can make sure that you are not losing your future, because the more we don't pay attention to them, the more we're not going to figure out who's going to be mayor in 2035. Yeah. And as for what you were talking about, the buildings, the Motown, everybody knows Motown, right? Yeah. Raise your hand. Oh my God, I need to take a picture. So this is what I'm saying. So the Motown Museum, as everybody knows, it was this little house on Grand Boulevard that Berry Gordy took all these high school kids from Detroit public schools and turned them into stars. Diana Ross was 18 years old. So their first attempt at expansion, their first phase of expansion is the three houses. He had a house where he pressed the records in the kitchen. There was a house next to that. There was a house next to that. Their first phase of expansion is they cleared out the walls, and those houses are connected now so that you can walk through inside from one house to the other for this internal museum. What if you did that with some of these office buildings and created spaces for young people? So instead of saying, "Oh, why are they here?" It's like, "Oh, here, you should be here." There's so many things that we don't think about because we just haven't thought about them that we need to think differently. So
I do want to jump in quick.
Please.
I think that youth is the key group for this conversation. And you opened, Adair, by talking about notions of co-generation. We've also talked a lot about kind of who leads this, and where does that come from? I do think this is about turning over to generations that are going to live with whatever happens with kind of reimagining a city. And it is also one of the areas when I was city coordinator where I felt like I rarely heard anyone say on a policy decision or a practice decision, what's the effect on the next generation? R.T. Rybeck and I went to Stockholm, and we had meetings 3 days and probably 15 or 20 meetings. There wasn't a single meeting where the public administrators didn't say, we've analyzed what the next generation would want this policy to mean. Not a single meeting. This is something European cities do so much better than American cities. And so I think this is, again, a big leap where it's not about just pulling them in a room and giving them a token space at a table. It's really about letting them step up in a way to lead and share and take charge of kind of what comes next.
Yes, absolutely. You opened a door, and I'm going to walk through it, because I do, you and I were sitting over to the side here, and we said, okay, around this question of who leads, and I think that that's an important, because I think in this moment, we're paralyzed in some ways, and so we're actually waiting, sitting on the edge, waiting for the leader to emerge. And so the two of you working, and you've worked with institutions like governments, and you all have worked in government, are working in government. And so I'm curious of just like, how do you get, we can't decouple policy making from some of the things in which you all have brought up. And so how do you get that action there? Stephen, you and I said the preamble actually tells us where the power sits. It's we the people.
Yep.
And so I'm curious on your take on working inside of government institutions, you working with and facilitating conversations there. How do you get that action? That's not the only solution, but a critical part to a lot of the things in which we're discussing.
You have to actually believe in we the people instead of you the people. So it's not you and us, and we're working on this, and what do you think? But you have to actually start with everybody at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And that means young people, that means older people, that means musicians, that means architects. Just, literally listen to each other to find out where you are, because half the time we're doing this planning, we don't know where we are now. We're literally, okay, let's just start here. Well, is that where you really need to start? Is that where you really are? I don't think we pay enough attention. Sometimes people think it's too philosophical to talk about things like that or think about things like that. Mm-hmm. I love what you said at the beginning about that moment where there's going to be a change, and usually you're dumped or somebody's dumping you. I dumped somebody and I soared. Yep. So I thought, okay, so where's that moment for people? How do you get them to understand where they're supposed to go next, or where we're supposed to go next?
I don't. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kate.
Specifically for you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I don't think this is a moment where we should wait for someone to lead. Okay. And I think it is a moment for multiple leaders. And in government, of course, so I think for people who have become leaders of communities, whatever that is, who have been elected leaders, certainly this is a moment that all of them need to step up and come forward. Because I think that if you've spent your life kind of stepping forward to solve problems, again, this is the moment. But I do fear that people can think that it is a single person, that it is a mayor, or that it is the business community because of money or resources, and I don't think that's going to be adequate in this moment.
That's wonderful. Kate, and you can certainly pick up on that. And my question to you is that as your work centers on bringing those from the margins, and you do to the conversation and putting them at the center of the conversation in this kind of co-creation phase. But that's not without a lot of trust building and restoring some sort of faith and hope in that things are going to be better. And so we can talk about inclusive cities, but we have to recognize that there's been a lot of trust broken. For sure. And so how do you restore it? How do you, in order to get those voices at the table, what are the ways we can do that?
We have a lot of really tactical ways that we can do that. And we work across a lot of different sectors: community development, yes; government, yes; philanthropy, yes; healthcare. All of our publicly accountable systems, and oftentimes in concert together. and often in moments where there's been severe harm. And we have to start by a willingness to show receipts, right? We have to be willing to not just bring community insights forward and then listen and then do what we want and then get to a public comment period and show a different end result. This is really about incorporating a community's vision at the beginning, ensuring we make a public promise or a commitment to what we're going to do and what we won't do, right? We're not going to always listen to every idea. We heard, heard some great ideas during our insights gathering process for the new downtown. A biodome, a roller rink, a roller rink and a biodome, right? Like lots of different great ideas, but not all of them will be actionable. We have to make a promise that's real. And then we have to follow through on it in real time, and we have to commit to taking action. Stephen, you said that Minneapolis has done a lot of things right. And that's true. We have an incredible civic infrastructure. Yeah. But we haven't really shown receipts. We're the worst in the nation on our wealth gap, our racial wealth gap, despite having huge civic investment. So we have work to do to rebuild that trust. It will take time, but it is about showing that we are putting our money where our mouth is, that we are doing the work and taking action. Really tangible action, but rebuilding trust is about doing what we say and saying what we mean. We got to get rid of Minnesota Nice a little bit. Mm-hmm. We got to share power. We got to install new folks in power. We have to recognize when we have power and when we are gatekeepers. Being a gatekeeper is not necessarily a bad thing. What's bad about it is not knowing that you are one, not being willing to harness that for a just end result, and not being able to recognize the seat that you have or the position that you do have. And I think a commitment to making that change is really important. So yes, it's going to take all of us, but we have to recognize that all of us do not currently have the same power and privilege to change the rules.
So you asked at some point where, when does this start? This city needs to take some actions immediately, and is. I'm reading about the North Star Center and kind of the affordable housing mix there and the conversion. But maybe this is the time, and I love this notion that the Minneapolis Foundation, the Walker Arts Center did, where they're inviting you to become part of kind of that cohort of people that go out and say, I can play a role. But maybe this is a moment where we bring back the 2014 Seytu Jones communal table that he did in Frogtown. Maybe that was I think a half a mile and 2,000 participants for dinner. Yeah. Maybe sooner than later you put 12 blocks of tables down the center of Nicollet Mall and you genuinely invite the city to dinner and say, we're going to hear your ideas first. And, that was a Walker Arts Center supported thing. This is tapping artistry that is, how proud can we be that he has been here and played a role with the city. These are the things the city has. You just need to let it in. You need to open up, ask, invite, and it will come.
Wow. You just created our engagement strategy.
Just literally.
Yeah. Imagine Deliver just put out a Get Started guide for gathering community insights. And one of the things we say is you have to create experiences that draw genius. And Seytu's Frogtown table was exactly that.
Well, let me just say this, and I adore you, and we've only known each other a week. When you say things like, you have to let it in, you still have to remember you're talking about a you letting someone else in. And we have to be so careful about making sure that we are talking to each other rather than there's the inside and the outside. And so much of that will come again from sharing that power. And
right.
it's nothing, we all do it.
Right.
We all do it. I will go back and talk about, okay, how are we going to make sure that, those folks over there can get over here? And it's like, no, go ask those folks, how would you like to walk over?
Sure.
What do we need to do? No, we'll come over to you. But
there's still an invitation.
There's still an invitation. So,
wonderful and such tangible and great ideas, and we're going to make a lot of these things happen.
I'm writing some of these
especially
down.
This table on Nicollet Mall. We're going to done. So you all are invited to dinner. I want to right size expectations as we come to the close, because
Good
I
luck.
think, yeah. There are a lot of structured wins that we can get early on here, and you all have given really tangible things that we can start doing today. But we know that we didn't get here overnight, right? And so this arc of change, and it will require hard work. And so I'd love for you all to just share, kind of right size those expectations around, so that everyone leaves here knowing. Because I think we're all waiting, is it the next political cycle? Is it when the workers return back downtown? And that still won't be the end. And so I'd love for you all to just come in on that.
I think there's a lot of, we focus with our strategy clients on how to start on Monday. There's a lot we can do on Monday. Rethinking the parking situation downtown. Let's see. Creating small pilot alternatives to policing. Reopening third spaces for recreation, even if they're empty third spaces that need programming, right? Repurposing street level spaces. Investing in BIPOC-owned businesses and attracting them downtown. And we have to show our receipts too.
People have to see themselves.
Yeah,
And
we
so,
have to see ourselves there. And I think the people in Minneapolis can create a new drumbeat that turns into the heartbeat of our city.
It's kind of one of those times where it's going to take some really big ideas, but there's kind of no idea that's too small either at this time, and kind of grabbing them when you can and doing something with them. Just again, and walking around town and talking to shop owners and people. So many people said to me when I said I was part of this conversation, thank heavens. I didn't think anyone was thinking about it. I have these ideas, and I said, but they really don't know where to take them or what to do with them. And I just, it's here. Tap the talents that you have. I mean, on this economic and building economic wealth, the Center for Economic Inclusion, again, is a jewel of this metropolitan area. All they are doing is about wealth building with minority communities and marginalized communities, for small businesses. Tap the wealth you have.
The only advice I would give is the same advice that I give to my colleagues and my friends and artists and strangers sometimes in Detroit. Find your space. Find the place where you're supposed to be, where you get in and fit in, and be a part of a branding strategy that makes it clear who you are, what Minneapolis is, what Detroit is, what any city is. I will say this to you, and I may get in trouble, but it's okay, because I was a newspaper columnist for 20 years, and I got in trouble a lot. I came to Minneapolis. I literally had about 28 hours. I flew in this afternoon. I have a 6 a.m. flight back, so I didn't have a chance to stay. But at lunch today, I was here with 2 new friends, and I said, tell me one thing that represents your Minneapolis. And one person said Prince, and the other person said Minnesota nice. And I was at a table with 3 white people, and if somebody black had been at the table, they probably might have said George Floyd. But for me, I can tell you that I know I didn't have a lot of time, and I had a free afternoon. I did not for a minute think about going to that corner where a man was murdered. I needed to go see the Mary Tyler Moore statue. And I took a picture, and I sat at her table at Crystal Court, and I thought, Minneapolis, like every other city, needs to decide and define what it is, and then make sure everybody participates in the realization of that definition. So once you do that and you decide where you are, and not where you are now, but where you are in 1935, when you're not paying attention to that mayor who you should have been training and talking to about what you wanted, in another few years. So find your space where you have a talent that you can help. Don't try to do somebody else's job. Do your job. If you're an amazing leader, be the mayor. If you're an amazing baker, be the baker and demand to have a space in a downtown building. Just find your space.
The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing.
The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing.
Well, what a wonderful conversation and so much rich insights. And a wealth of knowledge. I'm inspired. You've given me hope, and my own call to
Dude,
action.
I can't wait to take you back to Detroit. You got to come and talk to us. You are
coming
brilliant.
too.
Yeah. So at this moment, we want to open it up to the audience for a few questions. I know there's some folks that want to ask some things, and I believe there's some folks in the audience with some mics that, if you just raise your hand, I saw some hand go up here in the center for the panelists. Right to your over there.
Hi. So I was wondering what all the panelists thought about maybe the pace of a lot of these changes that people are thinking about. Because I think a lot of people who pay attention to civic affairs are often very frustrated at how slow things move. That it takes years for like a duplex to be permitted, or it takes these public transit projects get caught up in delays and red tape, or somebody files some sort of lawsuit, or these bike lanes that get built and then they're destroyed and they're not rebuilt. So maybe, in the light of think like housing, climate crises, where do you see the processes to speed some of these things up?
Yeah, I just want to jump in because there have been a couple. I did a lot of reading, and there were a couple expert panels, and one of the first pieces of advice to cities was you must start now. And part of that starting now is if any city allows an identity of their core to die or to hollow out to a point of no return, it's dangerous. It's hard to come back from. You're digging a bigger hole. So one of the things you need to hold your city leaders accountable to is loosening up, dropping some regulations that are going to need to be changed, trying new things, and frankly allowing the city to fail a bit here and there. So I don't think this isn't going to be done with kind of the regulations that are in place or the processes that have happened. This is going to have to be kind of new ways of working, or you're not going to get these buildings refilled.
We have an illustration on our team that we keep on the wall, and it has 2 books in a fire, and one of them says, "This is how we've always done it," right? We have, and it was so much better when. Those are the 2 book titles. We put those in the fire. We have to, I just want to echo what you shared. We have new ways of doing, because old ways of doing will not achieve different results.
And embrace a little messiness.
Other questions? Oh, in the back there. Yeah, wonderful. Please. Oh, you don't have the mic, Megan. You're just waving. Okay.
Thank you for reaching it all the way back in the corner. Yes. 2 questions. So one question I have is, you guys talked about like young people and like creating spaces for them, but I think another part of it is downtown should be a destination for, lack of a better term, like a place to have a girls' night out or a party night. And what are some ideas you have to do that? And what are ideas you guys have for the mom and pop shops to keep downtown as an affordable place?
We almost want to all look at Stephen.
Well, there's. I actually have.
I don't do girls' night out, so that's up to you.
You should try.
I was gonna come in on and not on the first part of that question, because we actually talked about this in the planning, and it didn't make it in, but that the nightlife economy. And it's a big part of downtown, the vibrancy of a city. And if you actually think about the things that happen after 9 o'clock, right, there's a lot of activity. And so a few cities have done this, Philadelphia, I think maybe New York, have hired nightlife mayors that are in the city government. And they are only focused on the vibrancy of what happens at night. And it actually, they're seeing trends and statistics of like crime going down because there's coordinated action with public safety and businesses. Security is talking to each other, and they're creating. Food trucks are lined up at night for people to be able to access, in the city. It's hard to find a meal after 10 o'clock. And so that's a great solution that we've seen. But
I can tell you that our former nighttime mayor, who left to go run for Congress and has not come back, but he left this treatise on the 24-hour economy, and he talked about it's not just about hanging out. It's about a dry cleaners that's open when people get off work at midnight. It's about, restaurants that are open with good food, so you're not going to, I'm not going to say it, McDonald's. Did I say that out loud? Yes. But as far as girls' night out, what you do is you find a space and make it yours. We take over some spaces. So I think, again, it's about that rebranding of where you are and where you want to be. Find your space and claim it.
Thank you. I love all of this energy. And I'm thinking, I've been to, not the Frogtown dinner, but I have been to one, and I am imagining it. But the problem is that we have monsters on Nicollet Mall, and they're called buses. And from my perspective, living right, I can see my house right in this picture. I don't know how any of this can happen if we keep that same transportation on Nicollet Mall. And that is really an us and a we, because I've spent time looking into it, and I keep getting fingers pointed this way to that person and the other person, and then make sure I hire or vote or elect the next ward council person that'll be on that side of the government or the idea. But it's a we. It's not just up to our neighborhood. It's up to all of us to figure out a better way to, if we need to move people on Nicollet Mall, we do, but in a nice, calm, environmental, quiet way, so that we can really have a neighborhood on Nicollet Mall and not a transportation alley.
So nearly any of the revitalization plans post-COVID that you will look at, you mentioned the 15-minute city. European cities have embraced this completely. But European cities did kind of the density issues right, the transportation lines right, and so they've been used to it for a long time, and they're not afraid to have bicycles going over railroad tracks, and pedestrians are smart enough to figure out not to walk into the trains, etc. And but what I want to say is that this is, I think, a challenge to the culture of Minneapolis and Minnesota, maybe the Midwest, and certainly America. The love affair with the car is going to have to start to wane. And you are simply going to have to embrace what the city has done really quite well. They've had an astounding pedestrian plan for years. They've had bike plans, and they've made huge progress. You're known as kind of one of the bike capitals in the nation. So all the plans show the streets getting less for cars, more for walkers, more for bikers, and adopting what had to happen during COVID if you wanted to have people together at all. And so I suspect that that's the path you will be on if you want to create life on streets again and away from navigating buses.
And we need to improve public transportation
Yes.
to make sure that people can get
That is
downtown
true.
and stay
Everywhere.
downtown and enjoy their time downtown 24 hours a day. And there's a lot we can do with light and sound, and there's more we can do to embrace. You talked about chaos, and you talked about messiness, Adair. We can also, both things can be true at the same time, right? We need to bring more people and density downtown. We can take up more space and find different ways of actually activating life in our spaces.
We have time for one more question. Wonderful. Oh, well, okay.
Oh, wow.
Maybe.
I think you're outvoted.
Talk to each other and blend the question.
Who? Okay.
No, you, please.
All right. Hello, I'm Crystal Brown. I'm the outreach director for the Minnesota Women's Press, North Minneapolis resident. Background is in social work. So I am looking at this room also. That's part of the problem. First of all. Second of all, I'm about hope, and I'm about optimism and opportunity. However, I would like to hear some thoughts on the growing mistrust that lots of residents are having in the city with the current city council, with the current mayor, with these issues that, oh, we want people at the table and we want to listen to you. And then East Phillips, when it comes to it, you didn't want to listen to us at all. That wasn't your intention from the very beginning. And so I want to address how we're going to reckon with that, because Kate, as you were talking about, you know, bringing people from the margins in and all of that, you know, they were already systematically put there, and it's called reparations, and I haven't heard that term. And so when we're talking about this, I think there's a lot of reckoning that we have to do as Black people, as Indigenous people, as white people who are continually doing their work, and recognize that our systems, need to change. They've had to change for a long time. And how are we going to hold our leadership accountable so that this change can take place? Because I'm all about hope, but I don't see it happening if we don't hold people accountable and bring young people and everybody together.
I couldn't say it better. I think you're absolutely right. I think I don't know if you're referencing last year there was a community postcard project in South Minneapolis, right? Where people asked what should happen with the George Floyd Memorial. The roof depot. Okay, I think there was another thing too, where community very clearly shared what they wanted in a survey, and analysis happened differently than expected and reflected skewed results, right? So when we do the work of saying we're committed to sharing power and making change with community and co-design, there's real risk in that for our community members to show up once again and to hear themselves being, there's an opportunity for exploitation there. So when we commit to a co-design approach and a more equitable and just approach, we have to be really willing to double down on that, or our chasms are going to continue to grow. And it won't be about we, as Rochelle said. So I agree with you.
The only thing I can offer, and thank you so much for your comments, thank you, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. reserved some of his greatest criticism for his so-called allies, the people who said the right things, claimed to be the people who were, in the trenches, and they weren't. We have to literally hold our allies accountable. So either you are part of the we or you're not. And if you're not, don't pretend. I am past the point where I'm pretending that people who are standing there smiling with you are people who are helping. So I think that's one of the things that you've got to work on, which is those connections with real allies. Because if you're in a city that looks like the room and you want change, you have to make sure that you are connected to more people than the typical folks who are literally the ones who are I hate to use the word victims, but the ones who are screwed up, who get screwed. And if you can start to do that, because there are people who really are sincere, they just don't know what to do with their sincerity. Make them do the work. Make them, be a part of the vanguard. And if you can do some of that, that's a first step. I can tell you one of the things that the mayor of Detroit did was hold sessions in people's homes, 250 of them, where he went around the city and talked to people, really talked with them in their homes about what they wanted, what he could do better. And he does that even now. Every week he goes out and hangs out with people. And every Saturday he drives around the city, and we know because he comes the next week saying, okay, I saw this mess over here. These people were complaining about that. You got to make people do their jobs. And if they're not doing it, you have to get rid of them.
Yeah. I deeply want to acknowledge that, and we'll close, and the panelists will be available in the lobby after they take a quick break. But and I don't want to gloss over that statement, because I think we're all talking about places and building and access, but at the heart of it is we still need to do this reckoning in our community, and we're not done with that, and we continue to see harm perpetuated every day from a dais and all those things. And I don't want to miss that as part of this conversation. because in order to get all these things right, we have to do that as a city. And I think that that's exactly your point. While at the same time trying to give people the hope and optimism that I wake up every day with hope, because that's the only thing by which I can move forward, that I have to believe that something else is on the other side of this. And then we have the more tactical thing is Accountability Day, which is the second Tuesday, or is it the second Tuesday
Is
in
that a
November? In November.
That
Election
thing.
Day. Yeah.
We haven't had that in a while.
No,
so.
no,
was looking
no,
at you
no
like,
real.
what?
Yeah, it's not called that, but maybe it should be called Accountability Day. I don't know. Yes, so let's change that. And so that's something right we can do. But I want to go back to this thing in the beginning. Is that we the people, right? The power is in this room, and we can't abdicate our role. And I think a lot of what we're doing, in some cases, have given up that power. And so how do we reclaim it in this moment? But such a profound statement. Do not want to miss it, because I think it sits at the core of why we are here. So thank you all. Thank you. And we will see you in the lobby. Wait. There's a survey. There's some stuff you got to do. Hold on. Amanda Hunt, everyone.
Thanks, Adair. Thank you all for being here. I'm Amanda Hunt, Head of Public Engagement, Learning, and Impact. Thank you for your contributions to our panelists. Incredible to have you here in this space. Your energy, your ideas were so much appreciated. Adair for Nightlife Mayor. Steve and I always thought that we would do the dinner on Vineland, but we're going to Nicollet. We'll see you all there. Accountability Day. We've done a lot of good work tonight. Please take the survey. The QR code is available in the lobby, on the screen. Thank you for joining us again, and we'll see you for the third and final on May 17th. Good night, everyone.